Who is Mike Borgonzi? How did he come up in the Chiefs system? We are going to learn everything we can about his background, his philosophies, and much more from Arrowhead Pride Editor-in-Chief Pete Sweeney on today's episode. This is the Music City Audible. Let's get to it. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Music City Audible podcast presented by Broadway Sports Media in partnership with 440 Sports. I'm Justin Graver, and with me, as always, Justin Melo, and we're back again today to do a deep dive into Mike Borgonzi's background and what he really brings to the Titans from someone who knows his time in Kansas City very well, Arrowhead Pride Editor-in-Chief Pete Sweeney. But first, Justin, how's it going?
Doing well. This is a really good discussion that we had with Pete Sweeney. If you guys aren't familiar with him, he's been covering the Chiefs for over a decade. So essentially, he was almost hired when Mike Borgonzi was hired by the Chiefs. So he knows this inside and out. He has seen it from multiple regimes, from Scott Pioli to John Dorsey to Brett Veach, how Mike Borgonzi survived all of that, what it said about him, how he elevated, climbed the ladder. Most importantly, what he believes in team building philosophies, how they put that plan in action in Kansas City, and how they, yes, collaborated, an effort between everyone involved, especially recently, including, Andy Reid and Brett Veach with this current regime. So, and maybe how that, of course, relates to Chad Brinker and what they're going to have going on here in Tennessee. Really good discussion here with Pete Sweeney.
Yes, so let's get to it then. Without further ado, we now welcome in Pete Sweeney joining us, Kansas City Chiefs, covering the Chiefs for over 10 years, the editor-in-chief at Arrowhead Pride, and an expert on all things Kansas City. We've had him on Heed the Call podcast that I produce, if you've listened to that. And we are so excited. Pete, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, pleased to join you guys. I know it's an exciting time. You guys have been looking for the white knight for a while in terms of a GM, and I'm hoping that Mike Borgonzi is that guy for you.
So are we. So Borgonzi's been in Kansas City for a long time. He's been there since before Brett Veach, or he's not there anymore, but he was there before Brett Veach, before Andy Reid. Can you tell us a little bit about when the regime changes happened and Mike Borgonzi stayed on? Was it like noteworthy at the time? They're like, oh, they're retaining this personnel assistant or this executive assistant or whatever. Like, what was that process like back in the day when Borgonzi was climbing the ranks?
Yeah, you mentioned that I've covered the Chiefs for 10 plus years. Mike Borgonzi is one of those guys that predates me by a few years.
Wow.
And so started with the Pioli regime, low level, like any personnel assistant. I believe his first title was more of a manager of just player operations and business football operations. And so, that's really ground in, like you're just trying to get any kind of experience, foot in door type of thing. Obviously, he was liked enough by Scott Pioli to keep him around in those type of roles. And I know that Mr. Pioli is a media darling now, but he was a tough cookie back then. And you really had to earn your stripes and earn it every year. And obviously, Borgonzi did that to the point of when there was a regime change to Andy Reid and John Dorsey, they kept him around in a different type of role and allowed him to get more into scouting. And I think that's the path that he truly wanted to follow. And then, of course, as time went on, it seemed like that Andy Reid and Dorsey had some disagreements. So, I think maybe that stemmed from opinions on players, maybe a little bit of the salary cap stuff. And so the Chiefs went away from Dorsey, and I liken Andy Reid and Brett Veach to the Departed, where Jack Nicholson is like sort of bringing up his little mole there and really got to mold him into exactly what he wanted to be. Less sinister than the Departed here in football, but they make the change to Brett Veach, who had been really Andy's assistant for years and years. Originally had brought him in as an intern, and I think they really saw eye to eye on a lot of different things. And really what I think the key for Brett Veach is that Andy Reid was more of an extension of his football beliefs because they worked together for so long. And so Borgonzi was along for the ride. And I think the Chiefs really acknowledged and that third regime that he had the guns and sort of was on the same wavelength as them, to the point of, we need to keep promoting this guy to keep him around here and to keep him satisfied. And eventually became the assistant GM, did that for 4 years, and was really, I think, a man in waiting for an opportunity like this. And I think you talk to a lot of people in Kansas City, and they would tell you that this is far, far overdue for, what they would have thought would have happened. I think a lot of people thought this might have happened for Borgonzi a bit earlier. I think he had connections with the Washington team and New England, got some interview experience, and then finally found a home with the Titans ownership. And, in summarizing that, before your next question, I think what is really unique about Borgonzi that you don't get a lot from different candidates is being with the same team for so long, but having seen three different ways of doing things, where Pioli brought the Patriot way. You had John Dorsey, who I still consider like a college evaluation mastermind. Granted, I understand he took Baker Mayfield, 1-1, I don't know, but he's been pretty good as far as he goes. But he really turned the Chiefs roster around from the draft and from something we call in Kansas City. This is just a Kansas City thing. It's hard to keep so many things just in Kansas City, but this remains. I don't think a lot of people know about the Magnificent Seven, which was something that Dorsey did at the roster cut down that initial year, where he brought in 7 players, Ron Parker on one that stands out in my mind, where they were able to build a base of the roster. So we saw a complete reversal of the roster, and then he saw what Brett Beach was able to do, which is find your quarterback. And I think what has been their signature, in my opinion, has been finding these gems in the defensive back room on day 3 of the draft. The Chiefs seem to just be nails in that department, and I think that has been a signature of what they've been building in Kansas City.
Yeah, see, Graver, we talked about it a little bit on the previous pod earlier this week. But what strikes me so interesting about that, and I'm glad to hear Pete giving a lot of credit there to John Dorsey, because where did John Dorsey start his career? Nearly 10 years with the Green Bay Packers, and then eventually to Seattle for a little bit, and then back to Green Bay for quite a while before he landed in Kansas City. Look at all the shared connections, right? Like Chad Brinker, president of football ops in Tennessee, came up with John Schneider in Green Bay together. And then where did John Schneider go? To Seattle, right? So I think the shared experiences between Borgonzi and Brinker, learning under Scott Pioli together in a way, learning under a John Dorsey, a John Schneider, I think really brings this vision together. I guess a follow-up question, Pete, is you talked about this is long overdue for him. Correct me if I'm wrong, and you may not remember all the way back, but I feel like he's been a little selective too. Like I think he had declined a request or two in previous years. He was a finalist for the Commanders job last year. They end up going with Adam Peters, but it felt like he was very selective. And then at the introductory press conference, which I'm sure you didn't get a chance to catch, he said that after the interview with the Titans, he called his wife and said, I'm pretty sure this is the one for us, like just the way that I hit it off. So maybe if you have any insight into kind of how long he waited and maybe if he was a little selective.
Yeah, I just think the nature of player personnel, you might only get one shot. Some guys get 2. Usually it's 2 is it. And so I think it's really smart to be selective. I would imagine maybe that is something that Borgonzi took from Chris Ballard. Now, Chris Ballard was someone who garnered a lot of interest from a lot of different teams over the years and didn't really love, from what I could hear and tell, didn't love certain fits and wanted to make sure the ownership was good, wanted to make sure that had good bones. And I think Borgonzi, by learning so much from so many people, and then of course as a direct result of the Chiefs' success, was garnering interest, and he sort of earned through who he was able to impress and what he was able to do in Kansas City from an evaluation standpoint, the right to pick his spot. And I know there have been some concerns out of Tennessee from what I've seen. I've heard, I did an interview this morning on The Zone. I hear that you guys hate the word collaboration, and I'm learning that but I don't think he would have taken this gig if he didn't feel like I'm going to be able to throw my weight around. And so I think you're right on with that. I think it was as much him choosing Tennessee as Tennessee choosing him. Yeah.
One thing I want to ask you about, because There was a report earlier this week that when it came to the Chiefs picking Patrick Mahomes, that Borgonzi was the one who brought up the idea, like, we should really focus on what he does well as opposed to what he struggles with and the way we can put him in the best position to succeed. When they asked him in his introductory press conference about, are there any guys that like were your guys that you sort of stood on the table for, he declined. He basically said, you don't really stand on the table because you make these decisions months in advance. He sort of skirted the question of, is there any players that you would like take credit for having found with your time with Kansas City? And I think that was, out of respect and humility, and he didn't want to like go up there and be all braggy and showy. But I'm wondering if there are any reports that you have heard about in your time covering the Chiefs with Borgonzi there that were like players that maybe he had a special hand in identifying and bringing into Kansas City.
I mean, obviously dating back to his days as a scout. I mean, he certainly had particular players, but to me, I think what he's talking about there is just this idea that Kansas City really promotes from the ground up. And he's been in a leadership position really for the dynasty. So more so, of course, he scouted, but more so shedding that skin. And I think being able to respond with Brett and have multiple opinions. One thing that Brett always says, and like I said, and to their credit, you're asking me to name specific players. They do keep it close to the vest. And I think the way that they do it is Brett has these draft meetings usually immediately. It's like a week after, the Senior Bowl is kind of ongoing as the Super Bowl is. So it's sort of, they dive right in. I mean, because they've been playing the last game every year seemingly for a long time, if not the second to last. And it's crazy. And what they have is these initial meetings. And what I can tell you, like along the way from what I know about the Chiefs process, is Brett really allows everyone to be able to weigh in on a particular player. And that's why he starts the meetings so far in advance of the draft. I'm sure every NFL team does that to an extent, but that is something that they're always emphasizing. If there's a certain player that somebody loves, they're able to really weigh in front of everyone. And they have these discussions, and you hear about the like 12-hour meetings. They go to lunch, they go back into the room, and they really go through the draft board. And so, yeah, I think sometimes it's a lot of lip service that, everyone had a piece in it. But from what I've really learned, and this is true about the Kansas City process, they do allow each and every member to really have a piece of it. And I think with that Mahomes part, it's true. And again, more of an extension of Brett Veach. We do get Borgonzi. I think we get him like 2 or 3 times a year. He'll speak once during the draft and once during training camp. And what I really learned is that they have a comprehensive process, and what I think they've really established well, I'm going to go back to that word, is a collaboration with the coaching staff, where I think some GMs will go and have a plan, and they're going to draft the best player available. Not that Borgonzi doesn't do that, but they're always checking in with like, well, how does this fit with what Spagnuolo wants to do? How does this fit with our current roster? And like that feeling of no stone unturned. I looked up some of my stuff as I was prepping for some of this Tennessee stuff today of like what Borgonzi was saying at these press conferences. And something that really stood out is like and I truly feel this way and I believe him, like he really gets excited watching, for example, and this feels so mundane, I think, to even some of us, like other preseason games. Let's look at the end of their roster. Is player 52, 53, or even going into the practice squad, is that guy better than the guy we currently have in their practice squad? And one thing that I think has been important in the Chiefs' sustained success is like no feeling of satisfaction. Like we had a playoff team last year. We're not going to go and get a kick returner that we like. You're going to see it on Sunday. They just made a decision today, for example, and this is a low-level, deep dive, the stuff that you love, Graver, here sometimes on HTC. Like, they chose to say, Mecole Hardman, we're going to keep you on IR, even though he's perfectly healthy and ready to go now. And they feel like the Super Bowl winning catcher, the pass catcher, is a downgrade from a diamond in the rough that they found in this Nico Remigio, who had the kickoff return last week. And so those type of players don't just get found. These undrafted guys don't just get found unless you're comprehensive, diligent, unsatisfied. And I think that speaks to what Brett Veach has built. That speaks to what Borgonzi has been a right-hand man in building. And I guarantee you it's that type of energy that he's going to try to bring to Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm curious, Pete, how you think his experiences in the sort of the structure of decision making, if you will, makes him a good fit here. Because I don't know, again, how much you know about what the setup is here, but they have said flat out that President of Football Operations, Chad Brinker, is going to have quote unquote final say on the 53. They've tried to downplay that. They've doubled down on that, but they've downplayed by saying, well, Mike Borgonzi is going to be making the picks in the draft. Mike Borgonzi is going to be making the decisions in free agency. But it certainly sounds like Chad Brinker's, got to sign off on most of that. And if not, there will be healthy discussions had and collaboration, if you will. And in the setup in Kansas City, it sounds to me like, when you're the assistant GM, but you've got a GM above you in Brett Veach, but correct me if I'm wrong, neither of them had final say over the 53, right? That boiled down to Andy Reid as well, who had a huge role in that. So how do you think that plays out for him here?
I think Brett Veach is fantastic. I think he's done a really good job organizing this team, and he's someone who is never shy to credit the guys that are working with him. Borgonzi's name is mentioned a lot when it comes to just roster building and what they're doing there. But I think it's worth saying that I think this is underrated about what the Chiefs do. I think Andy Reid signs off on what Brett Veach decides. Andy Reid comes from a player personnel background. He did it in Philly. I think when he came to Kansas City, he wanted to focus more on coaching. But if you don't think Brett Veach is walking into Andy's room with the 10 players they're thinking about in the first round, I think you're crazy. And so, I really credit Brett Veach, and I think his trust from Reid has gotten greater and greater over the years. But I would imagine, and my read on the situation was probably when he first started as the decision maker, it was an Andy Reid sign off. Everyone wants to credit Brett Veach with Patrick Mahomes, and I think he deserves that. He, quote unquote, found Patrick Mahomes and got obsessed with his tape and kept bringing him to Andy, bringing him to Andy, bringing him to Andy. If Andy didn't sign off on Patrick Mahomes is not in Kansas City. So I think that's important to remember. And I understand why it's been a little bit back and forth with Titans fans and the decisions about okay, are they going to be able to make a difference if the same decision maker? And I think yes, because I think ideally what you want is a good collaboration, not this bad collaboration that they have. I think what's different about this particular situation that stands out to me is the coach is already in place. When the Chiefs sort of started this thing, that wasn't the case. They kind of came at the same time. So I think year one and year two will be interesting, now that you're bringing some new blood in. But in an ideal scenario, it's these three guys, the president of football ops, Borgonzi, and the head coach working in unison to find players that are going to maximize the position groups. And I think what's been a staple at Kansas City, too, is never being tired of young talent. And that's what has led to them having so many of these high quality contributors on rookie deals, and those are the keys, because that allows you to pay Chris Jones, that allows you to give Pat Mahomes a mega deal, that allows you to give Travis Kelce a raise. You're not able to do these things if you don't have a Trey Smith on a rookie contract, a Nick Bolton on a rookie contract, same thing with a Trent McDuffie. And I think it's that tireless, everyone thinks, it's a year-to-year thing for the Chiefs. They're already thinking about 2027. In conversations I have with people in the building, it's they're looking, for example, this year they got a Nick Bolton coming up, Trey Smith, and a Justin Reed coming up. You're not going to be able to keep everybody, and they're going to be so tight, even with the boost in cap, that they're looking at this year's draft more basically as their free agency. That's how serious this draft is for Kansas City, and possibly for Peting. I can't believe I'm saying those words. We'll see how it goes. But and so I just think his bones are so strong. And I think he can take a piece from all of these mentors that he had and sort of make it his own. But ideally what you want are these guys working together and moving in unison. And I think that's what they're going to be going after in Tennessee.
Yeah, that seems to be what they've been preaching since they brought Borgonzi on. So, Pete, we really appreciate your time here. Thanks for all this insight. I got one last question for you as we say goodbye. And this might be one the Titans fans are wondering. Maybe it's a little concerning for Titans fans deep down, even if they don't want to admit it. So the Chiefs, there's no doubt they've been great at restocking through the draft and develop, retaining players, letting the right ones walk and fill in the holes. But underneath all of that, or maybe on top of all of that, there's Patrick Mahomes. And the thing that makes the Chiefs great above everything else is Patrick Mahomes. If you had a league average quarterback in there, how do you think we would view the Chiefs roster building success? Do you think it would be like still something that we praise? Because you just named a bunch of guys that were mid to late round picks that have been massive successes, like Nick Bolton, Trey Smith, and Jarius Sneed, who's no longer there, or Tyreek Hill, or it goes back years, right? But how do you think that Justin, you have something to add?
Yeah, what Graver is asking is how do you build a roster that overcomes a weekly pick six from Will Levis? Like, how do you get there?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important that he went through the Alex Smith years, right? Like, that's what to me stands out when you're entering a situation like this. Like, he can make a decision. Is Will Levis the guy? Do we want to take a quarterback with this first overall pick? Or are neither of these the guys? And you go get like a Sam Darnold or, whoever the name, is out there that you believe in. Like, Alex Smith wasn't drafted by the Chiefs, and they were in a position where they felt at that time that they could go get a quarterback in the draft. And instead they said, no, we're going to make this roster top to bottom strong. It may not be a Super Bowl point. It may not be a Super Bowl team right away. And I think that's hard to expect. But I think if you are in that sort of QB purgatory, what you need to start doing is getting yourself in a position where you become one quarterback away. And we talk about those teams all the time. And then when you are in a position to take a quarterback, you go and do so. Now, I think they're likely to take a quarterback with the first overall pick. I have no insight into like what that decision is going to be. I know what the odds say and so on and so forth. But I think it isn't going to be a decision that's made lightly. I think they're going to really feel like that person is the guy, or else, there's such a trade back opportunity if you want to go in a different direction. I think it's an exciting time for Titans fans, and I'd kind of alluded to it along the way. You guys are going to love Trey Smith. I mean, he's fantastic. He's going to be a great addition to that offensive line. I'm sure of it. So.
That's hilarious. All right, Pete, we really appreciate your time. If you're not following him on Twitter, find him at PG Sween. Pete, good luck to your Chiefs this week. Have fun covering the games. Stay warm out there in Kansas City. And hopefully maybe you and I can link up in New Orleans if Kansas City wins this weekend. Yeah,
that'd be great. All right, guys, take care, and much luck to Borgonzi, and I hope this time next year we're talking about a Titans divisional round game. So,
all right, thanks again to Pete Sweeney. Really appreciate his time there, and he's a smart dude who knows the Chiefs really well, knows Borgonzi really well. He's a Heed the Call listener, so shout out to him for that, and we appreciate Pete's time there. I will disagree with him on one thing. We've talked about this a little bit. I don't think it's best to build up your roster and then try to just slot in the quarterback.
I was thinking about you. I know how bad you're thinking quarterback. It was good insight, right? I mean, they certainly did that, right? They felt they weren't ready. They had reached their ceiling with Alex Smith. I mean, doesn't get any lower than losing to the Titans at home in the playoffs, right? The Mark Mariota self-touchdown pass. Like, they had reached the ceiling with Alex Smith. Let's be honest. They had. They make the move to draft Patrick Mahomes. He was on the bench for that game, I believe, right? That the Titans won. But I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think you're right.
You a lot. Yeah, he was a rookie. Tells you a lot about the patience, that they had in their process. Interesting insight. The final point I want to make about Pete's appearance, if you're a Titans fan, and I was very positive on the last podcast, and I'm feeling very positive. If there's the one underlying negative that I'm worried about, that you should be worried about, he talked about all the decisions being made in unison with Andy Reid, with the head coach being very much a part of this. I am not convinced yet, and it's going to take a lot. It's going to take actual tangible evidence for me to see and believe that Chad Brinker and Mike Borgonzi absolutely think that Brian Callahan's the guy, that they're going to be relying on him, leaning on him, building the team that he also wants. I don't know. This to me, they might be. They might also be John Robinson and just entertaining Mike Mularkey for a year before they can fire him and really get their guy in the role. So that's the one thing that I'm, the lingering underlying concern, if you will. I don't know that they've got a head coach that they're in unison with. Only time will tell.
And it doesn't matter if, what really matters there is Brian Callahan good? Is he a good head coach? Because if they're not in unison or they don't believe in him right now, or Mike Borgonzi, who's never really worked with Brian Callahan before, over the next few months, maybe they'll learn to be in unison and they'll learn to work together well. But if you hit the field in September and the team sucks because Brian Callahan just doesn't have what it takes to be a good head coach, it doesn't matter. And that's where I do think the concerns are, because you're going to ask for Brian Callahan's input. You're going to draft players for his scheme.
Are they though?
Or
I know they
you?
said they will,
or are
but
you?
I don't know that that's for sure. That's what I'm trying not to cut you off there, but I think, you hopefully, before September, right? Like, of course the results are going to matter, but I think you've got a good idea on, this is my kind of guy or this is not my kind of guy. Like, they should know in March and April. Right? Because you're going to spend these next 2-3 months. They're going to the Shrine Bowl together. They're going to the Senior Bowl together. They should learn quickly whether they see eye to eye with him or not. And if they don't, I'm sorry, but you're not afraid to just draft good football players, guys that you believe are good football players, regardless of how he feels about them to a degree. So it'll be interesting. It'll be, we're not going to know because they're not going to flat out come out. Brian Callahan's not going to come out and say, I didn't want them to draft any of these guys. I wanted A, B, C, right? But we'll know eventually. It's going to take time, but that's the underlying question is, do they think he's the guy? And if so, and if not, yes, no. Do they build a team that he wants, or do they just build a team that they think fits what they're trying to build?
I think we will know on draft night or before, depending on if they make a trade like John Robinson did. If they draft a quarterback on draft night, they believe in Brian Callahan.
Yeah, that's
if
fair.
They draft Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter or trade back, it's because they don't. That's not concrete, obviously, by any means. I'm making assumptions and guesses and pulling Charlie Day on the strings board or whatever, conspiracy theories. But
Always funny.
Yes, I fully believe that if they believe in Brian Callahan, if they draft a quarterback number 1, it's because they believe in Brian Callahan. Or they really, really believe in that quarterback to the point where they're like, we're going to put you through a year of hell, and then we're going to give you a good head coach. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, because I get what you're saying, because I think on the opposite end of that, like, if they don't draft a quarterback, and you could be really bad when you draft a quarterback. A lot of teams are, but I hope you get what I'm saying. If you don't draft a quarterback, you're probably going to be bad, right? And if they are bad, it's hard for me to envision Brian Callahan surviving that. Right. Whereas if you draft a quarterback, I know it's never happens, but there's that chance that it's a Jaden Daniels. Right. But if the plan is a Derek Carr or a Kirk Cousins, you don't think you're going to be great. I don't think. Right. So and Brian Callahan doesn't survive that. So I think you're right to that degree. If it's just bridge quarterback, he's toast. You know what I mean? Yeah. And if it's draft a quarterback, maybe there's a chance we have, a Jaden Daniels and we're great right away. But even if we're not great right away, he still has a chance to survive a not so great year if they believe in him and that quarterback being, developing him. So yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that's, if you're going to have an early tell, and it's hard to have an early tell, but if there is going to be one, it probably is whether or not they draft a quarterback.
So all aboard the Cam Ward train, because he's the closest thing in this draft to Patrick Mahomes. That's not saying much.
Jesus Christ.
That's not saying much, but closest thing in this draft, maybe. I don't even know if that's true, actually. All right, we will be back soon. Next week, we are going to have on a special guest to tell us why the Titans should be drafting Cam Ward number 1 overall.
Oh, dear Lord.
He's got some opinions. He's got some takes. No spoilers.
I'm going to push back. I've got bombshells that I'm planning on unleashing.
It's going to be a fun one.
I think we'll be back before that one, though, with one more, I think, with a special local guest who I don't think has ever been on here, I don't think. But really excited to get his take on the Borgonzi press conference, the partnership with Brinker. Really looking forward to that. So should hit you with 2 episodes again next week. One with hopefully being a Cam Ward draft breakdown episode, if you will, and another being a local expert that we're excited to have on.
Absolutely. So that'll do it for this one. Make sure you're subscribed to the Music City Audible channel. Give this video a thumbs up, like, and drop a comment below. Do you agree with Pete? Are you excited about Borgonzi? What are your thoughts after hearing everything we talked about today? And we'll be back soon. So until then, y'all stay safe out there and tighten up.
A Broadway sports media production.